Hey everybody, thanks for dropping back by the craft room and for tuning in earlier today during our live stream. We were experiencing some technical difficulties, so we wanted to wrap up some of the information that we didn't get to in today's live stream all about blocking and discuss it in another video for you here. We're going to talk about different fibers and how to block them properly, or the most optimal way to block them. We're also going to answer some frequently asked questions to do with blocking. In the description box down below, you'll find the link to today's live stream, which has a lot of information about blocking, the who, why, what, where, when, all those questions, and also links to two of our previous videos on how to wash and block an item and also how to steam block. We're going to thank everybody who gave us a super chat and who became a member at the end of the video. But first, let's get back to the FAQs and the fiber information for blocking. We started talking about different fibers. So if you're very new to knitting and crocheting, the fiber makeup of your yarn is what the yarn is actually made of. So we use a lot of acrylic and cotton here on the show. Acrylic is a synthetic or a man-made fiber, kind of like a plastic, and cotton is a natural fiber, just like wool or Angora or mohair or linen or bamboo. Fibers that are like natural. They're either plant-based or they're animal fur-based. So we're going to talk about those different things and how you can block them in an optimum way. The first one is Angora. Angora is rabbit, and that makes a really nice yarn. It's kind of on the expensive side. So anytime you're spending a lot of money on your yarn, you want to be very careful with how you treat it. It takes, you want to make sure you don't injure it when you're washing it, and if you're going to block it, you want to do the same thing. So for Angora yarn, wet blocking with a spray bottle is recommended, and instead of washing it, so you can wash the product, wash your project first if you feel it needs washing and then block it like we were talking about in the live stream, or you can lay it down flat on your blocking surface and use a spray bottle to get it wet as you pin it down. Remember to leave everything for at least 24 hours after you've blocked it, whether you steam blocked it, washed and blocked it, or spray blocked it, because it needs at least 24 hours to make sure it's dried completely. So if you're using Angora, they recommend spray wet blocking. Cotton. Cotton is a very forgiving yarn. You can, or I should say a very forgiving fiber. You can block it by using steam, by washing and blocking, or by using the spray bottle. Cotton will remember its shape even if you toss it into the dryer by accident and it comes out all gnarled. You can get it wet and reblock it and it'll go back to looking just about like new. So cotton is a really forgiving fiber. So if you're new to knitting or crochet and you're kind of wondering what sorts of fibers to get into, then I recommend cotton. It's very friendly, and it's a natural fiber, and it won't melt or do anything under heat, so you can be quite rough with it as you block. Linen is like cotton. It's a nicer version of cotton. You can do the same thing. You can block it by using a wash block technique, the spray bottle technique, or using a steam iron or a steamer. Mohair is also a natural wool fiber or wool fiber category. They recommend wet blocking by using a spray bottle, so as opposed to using a steamer or an iron. And remember, if you are using a steamer or an iron, you can do that with all of these fibers. You just have to be a little more careful. So this is a safer way to do it, especially if you're not familiar with blocking or you're uncomfortable using a steamer or an iron. And remember, never, ever, ever touch your iron or your steamer directly to your project. You don't want to injure your fibers. Novelty yarns. Novelty yarns are those things like eyelash or pom-pom or fake fur or any kind of yarn that's just a little bit weird and strange and full of little doodads. It's not typical yarn, so it's considered novelty. They don't recommend blocking novelty yarns at all. And if you are using novelty yarn in a project, we recommend that you always read the label for care and wash instructions, because depending on the fiber content and depending on the novelty of the yarn, there might be additional instructions that you want to keep in mind if you're going to wash it or do any kind of stretching. Synthetics are acrylics, polyester, anything that is a man-made fiber. Most synthetic materials are kind of like plastic, so you definitely don't want to apply a lot of heat to them. I have steam blocked my synthetic projects because I use a lot of acrylic, and you can steam block, it's all right, but one thing you want to keep in mind is that when you're steam blocking acrylic or synthetic projects, you are adding heat to the fibers, which in a way is melting some of those fibers together. So you're essentially fixing your project in place, which can be great if you really know what you're doing and you've laid it all out, you've pinned it down, and now you're steaming it and you've got all of your edges nice and flat and straight. Then it's great because you probably won't have to re-block that project again because you've sort of fixed the fibers in place. But you want to be careful because you definitely don't want to touch your iron or your steamer to your acrylic fabric because it will melt and that can ruin your entire project. And you also want to be careful not to use hot water when you're washing or getting your project wet. If you were going to spray block it, you don't want to use hot water because that will hurt the fibers or possibly do some damage to it. So you just don't want to melt your fibers. So synthetic fibers, think plastic, try to keep the heat away from them. You can use a steamer, but it will start to lock your blanket into place or your project, whatever it is, which is great if you know what you're doing. If you're unsure, we recommend washing and blocking or using the spray bottle method for your synthetic projects. Wool is a very common yarn fiber. It's obviously from sheep, and alpaca and llama are two of the other kinds of wools you may come into, but typically it's sheep wool. Sheep wool they recommend that you wet block it with a spray bottle, but you can also steam block it too. You won't melt wool fibers, but you can make them shiny. So you don't want to press your steamer or your iron against your wool. You want to just keep it up, hovered about an inch, maybe 2 inches above your project. That goes for anything you might be steaming. But you can also wet block using the spray bottle for wool. Just remember to let everything dry for at least 24 hours before you take out the pins or you pull it off the board or the towel, because it's still setting as it dries, and you want to make sure that it's completely dried so that you know that it's completely set itself in place. Blends, so wool blends, wool and acrylic, those are very common fibers out there. You can wet block or spray, get the thing laid out and spray it to get it wet. So you can wash and block or spray and block. That's what they recommend for wool blends. And silk is wet block only. Don't go anywhere near silk fibers with anything that is hot, like an iron or steamer or even hot water. Silk is very, very fragile fiber and you don't want to harm it, melt it, break it, anything like that. So if you are using silk, only wet block using cool water. And that is most of the fibers you're probably going to run into and how to treat them. You can get away with steam blocking just about all of them except silk, but you really want to know what you're doing. And so if you're new to knitting and crochet and you haven't done a whole lot of blocking, then the safest course is to use the spray bottle or to wash your project first and then lay it out to dry. Remember, if you're using pins to pin it into place, we recommend that you count all your pins as you're putting them in. Make a note and leave it next to your project so that when you come back 24 hours or possibly a couple days later, you count all the pins as you take them out, because you want to make sure, especially if you're using straight pins like for sewing, that you don't lose any in the, you don't lose any or get them stuck inside the project, because you wouldn't want to put on a sweater or snuggle up in a blanket and get stuck by a pin. So count the pins as you put them down, count the pins as you take them out, so you know that you've gotten out the same number you put in. Okay, here are some frequently asked questions about blocking. Do I need to block every time I wash? No, chances are you don't, but it also depends on the fiber. So if you wash a natural fiber object like a wool sweater, or you toss a cotton placemat or something into the washing machine and the dryer, you might notice some shrinking, and so you will want to block it to put it back into place. Always check the labels of your yarn, and if you're making something for someone as a gift, include wash and care instructions with the gift and a little tag, just so that people getting it know what they're supposed to do with it. They know what kind of temperature water to use, whether or not they can iron it or put it in the dryer. That's very important information if you're giving it away, and it's also very important information for you if you're keeping it for yourself. So if you've used acrylic yarn and you steam blocked it and you set it in place, chances are after you wash your blanket or your acrylic project again, you won't need to block it. But if you find that you do, it would just be a very small part, and if it's still damp when it comes out of being washed in the washing machine, or even if you hand washed it, just lay it flat to dry. Place it on the towel kind of where you need it to sit properly. You may not even need to pin it, and just let it dry in place, and it should be just fine. What if I block it too much? Do you overblock, or can you overblock something? Meaning if you've stretched it out too much. So this is something you might want to keep in mind if it's a piece of clothing and there's a gauge associated with it. Have a measuring tape handy. If you know, for example, that the sleeve of your sweater is only supposed to be 18 inches from shoulder to cuff, lay out that sleeve, measure it, and then stretch it to exactly the right measurement and pin it into place, let it dry. If it's a bit long, then don't pin it, just lay it flat and let it dry, and it should shrink up a little bit. If you accidentally overblock something like an acrylic blanket or a cotton project and you've stretched your stitches out too much, then you can put it back in the washing machine and give it another wash, and that sometimes, not always, but quite often, kind of lets everything shrink back up again. So I found that helps, especially with cotton. Should I include it in my care instructions? Absolutely. So if you're giving something away like a natural fiber sweater, like a wool or a mohair or an Angora sweater, it's recommended that you also give blocking instructions, just in case after a washing they find that it's shrinking up a little bit. It's helpful for them to know how to get that back to the right size. Otherwise they might feel like they ruined their gift and they might not want to tell you about it. So if you're giving something away, don't be afraid to give wash and care instructions, and don't be afraid to have a conversation about blocking, because that's just natural care of something like a sweater or a blanket. How to block something like a sweater. This depends. If you've knit the sweater or crocheted the sweater, you might want to block your pieces before you put them together. Depending on the pattern stitch, sometimes you might find that some edges are a little bit ripply, wavy, tight, curling. You might find it easier to assemble the sweater after you've blocked all the individual pieces. You also might find that the sweater goes together and hangs nicer if you block the individual pieces first and then put the sweater together. On the other hand, if it's something like a baby sweater and there's really only 2 or 3 pieces to it, so there's not a lot, you might not feel that it needs to be blocked in its individual pieces, in which case you can get the whole thing together, give it a wash, or get it damp, and then block it out to the size that you feel it should be. Again, keep your measuring tape handy, especially for baby clothing. Let it dry flat, let it dry at least 24 hours, and it should be just fine. Do all things need to be blocked? No, not everything needs to be blocked. Blocking is great if you find the edges of things are curling up, there's a little bit of rippling, maybe things look a little tight in places. You may want to block your projects then, like your blankets or your sweaters or even a hat. But if it fits or it looks fine or your edges are straight and there's no rippling and everything lays flat, there is no need to block it. You don't have to do that, especially if it's something you're making for yourself. Blocking is really handy if you want to present something in its best possible light. So if you're entering it at the fair, if you're giving it as a gift, or even if you're selling it to someone you know, you want it to look as good as possible. And that's why you might want to block the project. But it's really good to know what your fiber content is, how it's going to react in different kinds of temperatures of water or with steam before you go ahead and block. So do a little research if you're unsure, and if you are giving it away, then make sure to include that information with it. And the last frequently asked question, should or how do I use fabric stiffener or starch? So if you're blocking a project for, let's say, a Christmas ornament, like you've made a little tiny thread snowflake and you want to hang them on the tree, but you don't want them to, to be droopy, then you can add a little bit of spray starch or some kind of fabric stiffener in the process of blocking them. So you can get them damp, lay them all flat, spray some stiffener on it, and let them dry completely, and they should dry nice and flat and stiff. And that's typically when you would add stiffener, stiffening agent to something, is typically for like a little ornament or something you want to hang stiff. Most clothing you don't want it to be stiff, We don't typically crochet ourselves stiff collars. However, if you do crochet yourself a collar and you feel that it's a little too loose and floppy, the same thing applies. Lay it out flat, get it a little damp, use your spray bottle, make sure it's damp, and then put a little bit of spray stiffener or spray starch on it. Pin it if necessary, let it dry completely, and then that stiffener will just help keep that little project, whether it's a collar or a Christmas ornament, stiff and will stop it from drooping. All right, that's all the frequently asked questions we've had. If you have any more questions about different kinds of fiber and how to treat them, or questions about blocking in general, be sure to check out our 2 tutorials on wet blocking and steam blocking in the links below. We'll also link our previous live stream. There's a lot of information helpful there. Certainly the talking points are anyway. We'll make sure that's in the description box below as well. And if there is something that we didn't cover, leave us a question in the comment section and we will be happy to get back to you. And now we'd like to give a quick thank you and shout out to everybody who contributed to our live stream earlier today with a super chat. The software wasn't working properly and we wanted to make sure we thanked you all individually. So we'd like to thank Linda S., Bethany B., Crimson Panther, Christina F., Granny Banani twice, Catherine H., Teresa B., ML, Licia, Allison T., Anna Victoria twice, Denise C., Quack Tattle, Tiara A., Evelyn, Marianne L., Donna S., and Stacy L. Thank you all so much for contributing to our live stream. We really appreciate it. We also want to welcome some new members: Mama Sarah, Victoria R., Marianne L., Beth B., and L. Welcome to the family, and in some cases, welcome back to the family. Thank you guys so much. We hope we've answered some of your frequently asked questions about blocking and also how to treat specific fibers in your yarn. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here in the craft room today, and we will see you all really soon on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an awesome weekend, everybody. Bye!